that by learning about the laws of the temple, how the temple was, the shape of the temple, etc., we're actually building it. This is actually the way we can fulfill the commandment of building a temple, which is actually one of the commandments of the Torah. It's found in Parshas Truma. The Torah says, make a temple for me, and I will dwell in the temple. So it's a mitzvah, it's a precept, commandment, whatever you want to call it, to build a temple. So how do we do it right now? Okay, by learning about the temple, we're building it. There's a whole book written about the temple by our sages. Our sages wrote actually two basic places about the temple. There's a place called Mishnah. Mishnah was written by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi a year 189, 100 and 200 of the Common Era, around that year. He wrote the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a whole very long book about laws. Within those laws, there are laws of how the temple was. It's called Masechta Midos. It's called a tractate Midos. Midos means literally measurements. And it defines in 5 chapters, describes the temple, how the temple was, the walls of the temple, the size of the walls of the temple, the different chambers of the temple, and the different places of the temple, how was it done, and etc., etc. Very, so to speak, long description. Besides that, the Rambam himself, this is a famous picture of the Rambam, Maimonides, he wrote laws of the temple. Within the laws of sacrifices and different types of avoida, works we have to do for God, which are described usually in Sefer Vayikra, in the 3rd book of Torah, the Rambam writes the laws of the temple, 8 chapters, lots of details and ideas, etc. Of course, he takes many of his ideas from the 5 chapters of Tractate Midos. The obvious question is, okay, as we spoke before in the Midrash of Yechezkel, wait a second, what do we need this for? Can I do it? The answer is not. And even if I want to do this, as we're going to see just in a few minutes, it's going to be like a diplomatic problem, big problem. Like the place of the temple, it cannot be somewhere else. It has to be in the place where God selected it should be, in the Temple Mount, etc., etc., as we're going to see. So can we go and just do it? It's not so simple. It's not so easy. So what should we learn about this? Basically, there are 2 answers. One has a detail, and then there's the Rebbe's answer, as I explained before. Let's go for the first answer. The Rambam, in a different book, he wrote also a commentary on the Mishnah, like a very interesting commentary on the book we spoke before about, that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi wrote. The Rambam wrote a commentary, and he says, look, you should read about this, even though you cannot do it. And the Rambam actually, he never knew Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. He wasn't there, but he understood we were not able to do it. He lived in Spain, in Egypt, etc. He's buried in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel. He said, you should learn about this for the future. Because when the 3rd temple has to be rebuilt or built, whatever, we should know what to do. But there's a problem. There's a big problem with this answer. The problem is that the 3rd temple is going to be different than the 2nd temple. So whatever is described in Tractate Midos, as I explained before, in the Mishnah by our sages, is what the 2nd temple was about. The 1st temple is clearly described in the book of Kings, Sefer Melachim, when Shlomo Melech, when King Solomon actually built the temple, he described point by point, millimeter by millimeter, inch by inch, what the temple was like, the things that were inside the temple, different vessels and things, everything. It's described over there. It's very clear. Everybody basically understands what it says over there. Very nice. The 3rd temple was described by Yechezkel, as I explained before. This is the prophecy he received, and he actually conveyed it the way he received it or the way he understood it, whatever the case is. However, when our sages were going to build the 2nd temple, again, 1st temple destroyed by the Babylonians, then we have to build a 2nd temple. How do we do it? Okay, you can do it just as the 1st temple, or you can do whatever Yechezkel said that the 2nd temple would be like. Yeah, but we didn't get what Yechezkel said. Oh yes, our sages write that Yechezkel's description of the temple, in his times it would be the second temple, but for us will be the third temple. Whatever Yechezkel wrote is not clear. What does it mean it's not clear? It's like ambiguous. Some things can be understood one way, another way. It's not clear. He wrote about it. Some things can be understood, but every single detail, I'm sorry, we don't know what Yechezkel is talking about. Even though he wrote his prophecies in a clear language, etc., we don't understand it. So what did our sages do to build the second temple? They took whatever they understood from the description that Yechezkel offered, and Yechezkel was not there anymore to ask him, can you clarify these verses? He wasn't there. He passed away. I don't know the years exactly, but he passed away. So he wasn't there. So whatever we understood from Yechezkel's description, our sages used it to build the second temple. And whatever we did not understand of Yechezkel's description, we built just like the first temple. So the second temple was like a hybrid, something like that, between the first temple and the third temple. And the third temple is not going to be like the first, and it's not going to be like the second. It's going to be like the Yechezkel said, which we don't understand today. So, based on this, now we can understand this second step of our slide right now. Tosafot Yom Tov is a commentary on the Mishnah also. The Rambam lived year 1100s in Spain. Tosafot Yom Tov, he lived in the years 1600s, around that years, actually the end of 1600s in Europe. He lived in Europe, in Prague, etc. Whatever, in Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic or whatever you want to call it in those days. He actually raises the question, the new building will be different. Why should we read about the second building, which is the description offered by our sages in Tractate Midos? I don't care about that. The third temple is not going to be like that. So why do we read it? So he says, okay, you're right. It's not going to be the same, but the third temple will be based on whatever we understand about the first temple and Yechezkel's description. So the third temple is also going to be or have the same parts, the same vessels, that basically the most fundamental things are going to be the same. That's why reading the second temple makes sense for the building of the third temple. Again, Maimonides said, if you don't read about the second temple, you're not going to understand how to build the third temple. But they're not going to be the same. Raises the question. He answers, look, basically, they are going to be, quote unquote, basically the same. They are going to be the same. Okay. However, the Rebbe offers a completely different explanation. Why should we read about the third temple, or for the sake of argument, just why should you read about the first temple, the verses in the book of Kings? What do you care? It was destroyed, and the second temple was not like that, and the third temple is not going to be like that either. So why should we read about that? And the Rebbe answers in a very simple but powerful way. Based on what we learned at the beginning, this midrash, with this conversation between Yechezkel and God, the Rebbe answers, look, there's a commandment that God said we should build a temple. And just as every commandment of the Torah, from the beginning to the end of the Torah, are eternal, each one of them, of course, they have conditions. This commandment applies in this place. This commandment applies in this time. This commandment applies to men. This one to women, and so on. It's right, they have conditions. However, they are eternal. What does that mean? That even when the conditions do not apply, the commandment is still over there, like you have to do it anyway. You can't, for whatever reason, at least learn about it. When you learn about a certain commandment, even if you're not able to do it, you don't do it because you can't, not because you don't want. If you don't want to do it, but you could, by reading it, you're not fulfilling anything. You should go and do it. But if you can't, for whatever reason, like legitimate reasons, so at least learn about it. And by learning about it, this is what we just learned about the Midrash, etc. By learning about it, it is as if you were actually fulfilling it. So the truth is, it doesn't really matter which temple you learn about. The first temple, the second temple, the third temple. Learn whatever you want. The sacrifices, it doesn't make a difference. The point is to learn about these ideas, because by learning about these ideas, you're actually building the temple. You're actually fulfilling the commandment of building the temple. That's why it makes sense in this time of the year, what is called again the 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av, to learn about the laws of the temple. This doesn't mean that in any other time of the year you should not learn about it. No, actually, we should learn about it in any time of the year, because every single time of the year, we should fulfill the commandment of building the temple. It doesn't make a difference what time it is. But in these times that, again, we're just suffering and we're crying the destruction of the temple, etc., etc., it makes even more sense that we learn about these ideas.